yesterday. I think it was page 100 or something. No, 200 in your text. In my
I have the
text,
PDF.
it's 129.
107. Omnipresent mental factor?
It says that 51 mental factors presented in a Sanga's compendium of knowledge.
All right, 105.
105. Okay, great. So I started that section. I read the first paragraph and the compendium of knowledge by Sangha and the treasure, I think.
106.
Oh yes, we went through the aggregates. We also went through the aggregates. Just to remind you, so of course there's the former aggregate, you have feeling, you have discernment, which I mentioned separately for the reason discussed yesterday. Then you have this category described here as conditioning factors, which includes the other 49 mental factors, as well as, for instance, imprints, prana, the life force, and so on. And then you have consciousness, which should not be just called consciousness. It's actually prime consciousness. In other words, main mind. So even though it's called consciousness, that's fine. But just to remember, it doesn't refer to consciousness in general, but to a main mind. That's what we went through yesterday. That's the last thing we discussed. So then in the context of explaining the aggregate of conditioning factors concomitant with the mind, this text presents the rest of the mental factors listed as 51 in number. We may of course wonder, do the 51 mental factors listed here in this text encompass all mental factors? And of course they don't. There's so many other mental functions. So as will be explained in a later section, there are many mental factors listed in what's called finer points of discipline, such as offensive instigation, which impels movement of body or mind, as in scowling. So feeling upset, feeling resentful, agitated. So the function of the mind that gives rise to a physical expression of that mental state, such as scowling, is called offensive instigation. Then you have discouragement, shumba, discouragement, yeah, like feeling low, feeling discouraged, which is a deep despondency of mind. Thinking that one is deathless, no doubt, due to a fear of death. Oh yeah, that's very common, I guess, no matter how old you are. Most people have it at some point. And then mental perturbation, or mental agitation. So, which is kind of, it's not anger, it's not resentment, just feeling perturbed, feeling agitated. Furthermore, Sanga's compendium of bases, Nagarjuna's precious garland, and many other texts present several that are not included among those enumerated in the list of 51 of the compendium of knowledge. This point is acknowledged in some of the classical commentaries on the compendium of knowledge, but since this presentation of 51 mental factors in the compendium of knowledge is quite well known, we will provide a fairly extensive explanation of it here. That's usually accepted. Of course, everyone says, oh, there are more, but whenever the mental factors are mentioned, they're listed as 51. The 51 mental factors are grouped in several different categories. So these 6 categories are most commonly known. I mean, Venice Holmes gives teachings, for instance, on the mental factors. It's always in that form. They're always listed in that way. And that is also true for other texts that just mention the mental factors. They're usually mentioned in this way. All right, so the first category that I want to go through extensively are the omnipresent mental factors. So I'm not just going to skip through the text and mention a few things, but I want to read the whole chapter on this because I think that's most important. That's the most important thing. I mean, that's what you really need to know. Everything else, it's good to know, of course, but not every detail is important. And since we're pressed for time, yeah, let's just go through this particular one, and the rest I'll just mention a few things. We've got 4 days left, and I'm sure we'll finish. Okay, so the first set the 5 omnipresent mental factors contains, feeling, discernment, intention, attention, and contact. Feeling experiences any of the 3, pleasure, pain, or neutral feeling, as its object. Discernment distinguishes the attributes of the object, such as this is blue and that is yellow. Intention moves the mind and mental factors toward the object, just as a magnet moves iron. Contact not causes. Contact is responsible for the mind and object to meet. Again, if contact caused mind and object to meet, that would mean contact would precede mind and object meeting. Attention directs the mind to a specific object. The verse summary reads, feeling, discernment, intention, contact, and attention are called omnipresent mental factors. So, now the definition of feeling. A mental factor that, by its own power, remember, by its own power, always implies or always indicates that this is the unique function of this mental factor, the reason for its existence. So a mental factor that by its own power experiences any type of pleasure, pain, or neutral feeling. The Compendium of Knowledge says, what is the definition of feeling? It has the characteristic of experience. And again, what does it mean to experience versus apprehend? Now, if you want to debate, what does experience mean here? It's not apprehended. How come we're aware of it? How come we know? Maybe not in all cases, but often enough we know that was just a pleasant mental event. If it wasn't apprehended, how can we remember later on that there was pleasure, for instance? When categorized, there are 3 types of feeling: pleasure, pain, and equanimity. Okay, that makes sense. Or they can be divided into 2 types: physical feeling and mental feeling. Physical means feeling that is associated or concomitant with any of the 5 sense consciousnesses, and then mental feeling, of course, associated with the mental consciousness. According to the first way of categorizing, when a consciousness accompanied by feeling engages an object, it experiences pleasure, pain, or equanimity, which is neither pleasure nor pain. According to the second of categorizing feelings that accompany a sense consciousness, according to the second way of categorizing feelings, the second way? It's the other way around. According to the second way of categorizing feelings that accompany a sense consciousness are called physical feelings. Physical feelings I've mentioned first and mental feelings second, but here it's the other way around. Okay, that's probably just a typo. According to the second way of categorizing feelings that accompany a sense consciousness are called physical feelings, whereas feelings that accompany a mental consciousness are called mental feelings. Ayadeva's 400 stanzas, for example, says, just as the tactile sense faculty pervades the whole body, delusion, or here the word can be confusion or even ignorance, dwells within all mental afflictions. So this is usually cited to indicate that the misperception of reality, ignorance, is present in all mental afflictions. But here the authors chose this quote to focus on the fact that tactile sense faculty, so the body sense faculty, pervades the whole body. So the tactile sense faculty pervades all parts of the body, from the crown of the head to the soles of the feet. So any feelings accompanying the other 4 sense consciousnesses, such as the visual sense consciousnesses, are physical feelings. That's what I mentioned, these 5 ways, or these 5 categories. I mentioned them earlier or during a former session. Additionally, there's a way of categorizing feeling as 5: pleasant physical feeling, unpleasant physical feeling, pleasant mental feeling, unpleasant mental feeling, and neutral feeling. It should actually be 6, strictly speaking, since pleasant and unpleasant feelings are distinguished here from the point of view of accompanying or being concomitant with the sense consciousness and a mental consciousness. You could do the same with neutral feeling, but I guess it's implied that neutral feeling here also refers to neutral feelings of a sense consciousness and of a mental consciousness. Okay, so I guess that's pretty clear, isn't it? It's already been discussed a few times before in the previous sections, and now is basically just summarizing it once again. And then second, the definition of discernment is a mental factor that by its own power apprehends the distinguishing mark of its object. The distinguishing mark of its object. So with regard to feeling, when we learn these different concepts, when we learn about the different minds or whatever it is we learn, then the teachers also point out what is there to debate, so that we always know something to discuss. And I hope that is the case now with feeling. I've mentioned something before. There are a few quotes where it seems to suggest pleasure and so forth are actually apprehended, and then the authors mention mental bliss, like you apprehend mental bliss. Does this refer to a sense consciousness or a mental consciousness? So there's plenty of there are plenty of quotes that, when taken literally, can give rise to debate. Okay. Second, the definition of discernment is a mental factor that by its own power apprehends the distinguishing mark of its object. Okay. The phrase apprehends the distinguishing mark means to not mix up the distinguishing characteristics or fine distinctions of an object. That is specifically important for conceptual mind. As we know, it engages its object via exclusion, and therefore it's important to exclude whatever is not a distinguishing mark of that particular object. But that's of course also the case when it comes to, having to distinguish certain marks. That importance of distinguishing the unique kind of marks of a particular object, that's of course also important for a sense consciousness. And here the authors describe it in particular when it comes to designating a convention, because that's what we do when we categorize things. The conceptual mind, and again I'm just repeating something that I said before, but the conceptual mind is that which labels, and every time there's a conceptual mind, which is always, we label. Oftentimes when we hear, like, the Prasangika school puts so much emphasis on labeling, so we may believe that to mean, oh, when we first, learn the term for a particular object. But that's just one type, a kind of a coarser type of labeling, more obvious type of labeling. But there are other types of labeling as well, like just having the thought is such and such. So we constantly, using the Prasangika explanation, we are constantly labeling in every moment. This is that person, they're like this, I'm like this. So we reinforce our sense of identity, and I'm not talking about here like the identity view as in being a wrong consciousness. That's why initially when I heard, instead of saying the view of the transitory collection, when I heard some translators use the term identity view, I thought, oh, that's a great translation. And then later on I thought, well, no. Why? Because the view of the transitory collection, that is, it doesn't imply it's a correct mind. In fact, just through having heard it so many times, as a student of the Dharma, you feel like, okay, oops. Different direction for a change. Okay. Whoops. I don't know. It doesn't. The sticky part no longer sticks.
Have to train the cat to stand on it.
Okay. Oh, that's just not going to stay, but never mind for now. Oops. All right. This camera. When you hear the view of the transitory collection, like being so used to it that this is an incorrect mind, well, you understand, okay, so you exaggerate the existence of your own I, you add to it, you add a mode of existence and kind of natural existence in such a way that the mind that the I doesn't seem to need anything else to exist. But when it comes to the identity view, of course we have an exaggerated view of identity, but when you think about it, what is your view of self? It's not just I the whole time. I mean, of course, there's that, but also I'm good at this, I'm good at that, I'm not that good at that, I suck at this, and so forth. So, like, constantly throughout our day, there's like we interact with other people. The focus is very much on the I, so there's a constant, I guess, judgment as well. Like, it doesn't have to be very obvious, but like, oh, I messed that one up, or oh, this worked really, this worked well, I prepared well, or whatever your thoughts are. And those are a constant labeling. I mean, you're constantly having these conceptual minds, and they label. And our view of ourselves in particular, but of course our view of everything else, is constantly reinforced. Did you notice? Like, all day long, we constantly, sometimes, like I said, reinforce the sense of self or reinforce our view of identity, but it also changes because we change and the things we can do, we learn new things, and so our view of ourselves changes. Oh, now I can drive a car, or now I can ride a bicycle, or whatever it is. So that's constantly labeling. We're always labeling. And why? Because there's discernment. There's the mental factor of discernment, and every now and then, of course, there's a wrong consciousness. We exaggerate what the self is, but let's not forget the view of the transitory collection is not always present. It's not always there. Sometimes it is, and sometimes it isn't. Wait, I'm not gonna fool with this camera, so I put a cushion behind, so I'll get a little tall now. All right, so. Therefore, the view of the transitory collection, yes, is not always present, but our constant reevaluation of reality, like this is this is that, it's always taking place. There's not a single moment, well, maybe during deep sleep, or when there's like a direct perceiver that is a dreaming mind, but other than that, it's always present. We're constantly labeling. I find that really interesting, because if everything is labeled, well, it should take place all the time, and our reality is very much dependent on our thoughts. So it's our thoughts that determine reality. It's not an objective reality anywhere, right? So anyway, never mind that. But I think it's important to understand this in the context here of mental conventions, or verbal not verbal conventions, just applying conventions. So labeling, designating terminology. That's why it says here in the text, regarding this, the Compendium of Knowledge says, what is the definition of discernment? That which has the essential nature of either apprehending or distinguishing mark, or apprehending a mental image. A mental image, it doesn't say a mental image. The Tibetan word is tawa, which kind of means multicolored, multicolored or variegated, but that's not what it means here. I think in this context it means diversity, so apprehending different features instead of a mental image. The mental image is involved, as you'll see now in a sec, because it's the conceptual mind. But this is not a literal translation from the Tibetan. So, what is the definition of discernment? That which has the essential nature of either apprehending a distinguishing mark, or apprehending diverse features through which a convention is applied to the objects of seeing, hearing, differentiating, and understanding. So I suppose the translators here ask what the different features refer to. The answer was, well, the different features are distinguished because of the appearance of different meaning generalities. So that's where that comes from, I could imagine. But yeah, actually it would be like different features or diversity. Yeah, maybe different features is more appropriate here. Anyway, so when categorized, that's the quote, quote by Arya Asanga, Compendium of Knowledge. And then the authors explain, when categorized, discernment has two divisions. Discernment that apprehends a distinguishing mark, and discernment that apprehends differing features. Images. I mean, I don't even know whether images here, because the authors never use the word mental image for meaning. I don't know whether they even mean meaning generality. This is new, this image, or mental aspects. Do they mean aspects instead of image? Maybe that's what they mean. I don't know. Yeah, it's not clear what the translators mean. At first I thought like image as in like meaning generality, but they never used the word mental image for that. They used image when they talked about aspect, mental aspects. What does that even mean? Mental objects. What else would it mean? Yeah, I don't know.
Gishma,
Yes, please.
what is a distinguishing mark?
It distinguishes it like a distinguishing mark, the way I understand it, or from the Tibetan. From the Tibetan, it's like when we talk about a definition is really the sum of the distinguishing marks, the main characteristics of something.
Okay.
It distinguishes, for instance, what distinguishes a vase from a pillar? Well, it's bulbous, round, flat-based, able to perform. Those I believe, looking at the Tibetan, are the distinguishing marks. Yeah. The kind of unique characteristics that distinguish it from everything else. I believe that's what they mean, at least based on the Tibetan. Whereas in Tibetan, it doesn't say mental image, it says like diversity, dawa, which has that connotation of variety or diversity. The first is discernment accompanying any of the five sense consciousnesses that apprehends objects. So although even with the conceptual mind, of course, you need the distinguishing marks or the defining characteristics. Yeah, distinguishing mark is like just another word for defining characteristic. But here the focus seems to be more on that, and I don't know why. This comes out of the blue, this explanation, and the authors don't specify more. So I don't know. I mean, I don't know why here this is specifically the distinguishing marks or the defining characteristic are specifically only used for the sense consciousnesses, because they could also be used for the conceptual minds as well, the mental consciousness. Anyway, so the first is discernment accompanying any of the five sense consciousnesses that apprehends objects such as blue and yellow without mixing them up. Yeah, obviously, with the eye consciousness, you don't, blue, yellow, you don't mix them up. You kind of can distinguish between them. The second is discernment accompanying a mental consciousness. And then it says that apprehends thoughts such as this is, but it doesn't say in Tibetan that it apprehends thought. It says it apprehends conventions such as this is blue, this is yellow. Right? Like when you like, as I said, when we have a conceptual mind, there's always labeling. You always label through the generic image, of course, but it's constantly this is that. Some would disagree. I have come across like disagreement, like not every mind label, not every conceptual mind labels. It's only when you think this is this and this is that. And I'm like, come on. I mean, it's like, what's the difference? I'm like this, I'm like that. So I'm not thinking with the words, this is this or this is that, but that's really what I'm doing, whether I use the words or not. So I personally believe, and I know some teachers also do, after some discussion, they usually say, yeah, but actually it's true. Like, you're just, you're always labeling. So some would agree and some would disagree. I definitely strongly believe that we label in every moment we have a conceptual mind, but never mind. So this is something open to debate. But going back to what it says here, the second is discernment accompanying a mental consciousness that apprehends conventions. It should not be thoughts, because that would mean apprehending itself, like a conventional mind. The second is a mental consciousness that apprehend thoughts, so it apprehends conceptual consciousness. But it doesn't say thoughts in Tibetan. It uses the word tanye, which means convention, which has previously also been used for convention. So the second is discernment accompanying a mental consciousness that apprehends conventions, such as this is blue or this is yellow, without mixing up these classificatory conventions. So again, it needs to be explained by the author. So what does this really mean? But what I get from this, and it kind of makes sense to me, it's a little heavy. It's just a little like technical with all the terminology that is new, like distinguishing mark. But I think what it's basically saying, yes. So when you perceive like the external world with the sense consciousnesses, then you perceive like yellow and blue and so forth, and they have their distinguishing marks that directly appear to the mind, and based on that we can then distinguish, or we know blue, yellow, etc. Similarly, on a conceptual level, these distinguishing marks, of course, also play a role, but it's the conventions basically. So it's this, it's that. The mental image, of course, not the mental image, the generic image, of course, plays a part in that, because things appear through this generic image, and through this appearance we distinguish. So part of the reason we have conventions is the generic image. I mean, that is the symbolism that allows us to get at an object. So we label because we have these generic image appearing through the mind, based on which we categorize different objects. So in that sense, it makes sense that the mental consciousness apprehends the conventions, blue, yellow, etc., without mixing them up. Is this clear, or did I confuse you more with what I said at the end? It's clear?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good. On what basis do these two minds of discernment operate? Of the four of seeing and so on, seeing refers to applying, and this is literally saying seeing, so with your eye consciousness, refers to applying a classificatory convention. It's again just convention. Why do they go back to classificatory? I don't know. It just says convention of things seen directly. Okay, so seeing refers to seeing something with your eye consciousness. Hearing does not refer to hearing sounds in general, but it refers to applying a convention to trustworthy words heard. All right, okay, so it's not so much about listening to music or whatever, but rather someone explaining, oh, it's like this, it's like that. Like when you go to school, most of what we learn, it's just we receive the information and we trust it. I mean, better do, because otherwise if we take an exam and we get wrong what the teacher said, we get a lower grade. So this is actually an example of like going to school, for instance, and learning the information. So we never go through well, we may in some cases go through the reasonings, like why it's like this and so forth, but usually it's about trusting a trustworthy source. So the teachers, of course, being trustworthy sources. So based on that, we apply conventions based on what we hear. Or we may Google it or use AI, but don't trust AIs. I've tried them for Buddhism and they really make a lot of mistakes. Very subtle ones. It sounds very convincing, but they do make a lot of mistakes. Differentiating refers to applying a convention to things ascertained in dependence on evidence. Pretty obvious. So actually applying the reasoning, a syllogism, a consequence, whichever you use, in order to understand something. So again, when you do that, the discernment here is described as differentiating, and understanding refers to applying a convention through discernment to things ascertained directly. So the last one is like, huh? What does that mean? Like directly realizing with a mental consciousness? No, but as I explained later on, we had seeing, we had hearing. Now, what we're left with is smelling, tasting, and having a physical sensation. So that's what's meant by this. Mm-hmm. So according to the explanatory commentaries on Abhidharma, this applies to what is seen by the eye, number one, heard by the ear, number two, understood by the mind, number three, using the evidence, and differentiated by the three, nose, tongue, and bodily sensation. Honestly, I don't know why this is in there. This is not something that is discussed a lot. It's nice. Okay, I guess the authors, they were looking for explanations on discernment, and that's what they came across. So fair enough. It's good to hear what the texts say about this. but it's still like, that seems so random, that kind of categorization. But never mind. It definitely gives us a better sense of discernment, of course, being responsible for applying conventions. And conventions are applied in different ways in terms of the sources that provide the information based on which we then apply conventions or label phenomena.
Geshima,
Yes, please.
all of these explanations seem to be involving conventions.
Mm-hmm.
So then, would they all be for conceptual minds?
They are conceptual minds, but the sources, where do we, like we label not just randomly. We first perceive certain things. We see things with our eyes, we hear things. So for instance, just to think about this process, like we make sense of the world based on, first of all, on what we see, very much, right? So the labeling mind is the conceptual mind, but based on the discernment that is concomitant with the eye consciousness, for instance, providing us with this particular information. So you go to a new place and you're like, oh, it's so green here. No one needs to explain it to you. Just see it. I mean, you have some experience, of course. So you go to this place. Oh, there are a lot of lakes. There are a lot of mountains. There are a lot of this, that, and the other. So you label based on what your eye consciousness perceives, or more specifically, based on what the discernment that is concomitant with that eye consciousness perceives. And then you label, of course, based on what you hear from other people. Here it doesn't talk about reading something, which you can do nowadays online, but let's just take what you hear in school. So you learn about these mountains, how long they've been there, how deep the lake is, what types of trees there are that you can see. You can learn about that based on trustworthy sources. So then you're labeling transforms again based on what you're. So of course the labeling mind is a conceptual mind only, but the information received based on which you then label, those are explained in this passage. And then when you continue with this kind of scenery, like looking at the scenery, so then if you have that personal interest in biology, for instance, you apply reasoning to understand better, I don't know, whatever it is. So you apply reasoning. That would be the third case, where you understand logically more about this particular place, and your labeling is accordingly you have, in accordance with that, you have a certain way you look at this scenery. And then you hear, then you smell things, you taste stuff. I mean, you're not going to bite into a tree, but whatever, maybe the fruits that these trees that grow on these trees, or the tangibility, the climate. Based on that, again, you label. Does that make sense? So it's these discernments, they provide us with the information about the environment around us. And of course, they do more than that. They help us to make sense of certain things with a mental consciousness, in particular when it comes to logic. And then based on that, we label.
So if I somehow did not have a conceptual consciousness for like 10 minutes, then I wouldn't.
If you don't have a conceptual consciousness for 10 minutes, yes.
Like, let's say that happened.
Yes.
Then I wouldn't really be able to make distinctions between things.
No, in that moment you wouldn't.
So for those 10 minutes, like, I wouldn't be able to tell that things are different from each other?
Well, you wouldn't be labeling, with your actually you wouldn't, because if there's no conceptual mind, then, of course this is hypothetical, but if there's no conceptual mind, then your sense consciousnesses, wouldn't they be awarenesses to which the object appears but is not ascertained? There are two possibilities. First of all, you always have a conceptual mind, but let's say there wasn't. Either your sense consciousnesses would still know things, but they wouldn't give rise to a mental consciousness that knows, or your sense consciousnesses wouldn't know anything, wouldn't realize anything, because there's no mental consciousness that they give rise to. So these are the two possibilities. In the case of the first possibility that you meant your eye consciousnesses or your other sense consciousnesses still know their object, then that knowledge would be purely a knowledge based on the sense consciousnesses. So that would be not as detailed, of course, because the mental consciousness can go into more details. So you would still have discernment in those moments. In the second scenario, you wouldn't know anything. Yeah.
And then for like a yogic direct perceiver, if I was seeing a pot as subtly impermanent,
So,
then in that moment I wouldn't really see it as subtly impermanent. I'd have to wait afterwards and think back like that.
oh, so a yogic direct perceiver knows it is this, it is that.
It does,
Oh yeah.
but it's not conceptual, right?
Well,
It's not
no, but
conceptual.
it's not like it's not in the same way as a thinking mind, like with the generic image and all that. But it would still know this is impermanent. I mean, of course, of course. I mean, like the Buddha's mind is always a yogic direct perceiver, and the Buddha's mind knows. But even as like knowing this is an ultimate truth, that knowing this is a conventional truth, the yogic direct perceivers know all that.
But do they apply a label?
No, I mean not in the same way that a generic image appears to them. They don't label, so they're not called labeling minds. So you see, like in Tibetan, it says Dio Nyamba. Dida Dio Nyamba. So this is really, it's kind of like saying,
Yeah, yeah,
this is thinking, this is this oh. Right? I don't know how to put it like this. Oh, it's kind of like stressing it. Oh, it's like that. But the oh comes at the end, so it's not like oh, it's this. I've tried to translate that. It sounds always ridiculous. But okay, so the conception was Didanti, this and that. So it is this and that. Oh, so thinking. That's how they usually express it. So Didanti wo nyamba. So it's therefore said, thinking it is this or that. That's not what the conception, what the yogic direct perceiver mind, the yogic direct perceiver mind, yogic direct perceiver does. It doesn't nyamba. Nyamba kind of means think. That's the clue. That's kind of like that word. It's not thinking. It's just apprehending. So there's a different quality of thought, which is very difficult to put into words. We have the generic image I could mention, but yeah, it's a different quality of perceiving its objects. It's got thought involved. While with the yogic direct perceiver, it just knows. That's it. Does that help? Yes, please.
How does it work for small
Oh,
children?
could you take the microphone, please?
How does it work for small children before 1 year old? Because do they have that kind of thought from familiarization from past life, or how does it work? I mean, you know.
Oh, that is such an easy question. No, that's such a difficult question. I don't remember even when I was 5. Forget about when I was 1. So it's like, from my own experience, I don't know. I don't know what it's like to be a toddler. Well, I've forgotten at least. So the thing is, I believe parts of it must come from past lives, like seeing colors, seeing shapes. But I don't know how much. I mean, of course, we carry a lot over our mental consciousness, being so accustomed to seeing certain things, knowing certain things. I mean, we sometimes talk about instinct, being able to know where to get our milk, for instance, though you could argue maybe it's the smell that indicates, oh, there's milk nearby, like knowing where to suck on and all that. So scientists usually talk about like instincts, but I wonder whether it's to do with imprints. But not just that. So yeah, anyway, I think there's a basic ability of the mind that is carried from life to life. But then as a child, I'm thinking, okay, there's no language, but you don't need language to be able to have a meaning generality. We have a hard time to talk about it now because we have no word to use, since we're talking about someone not using language. But I mean, even I think I mentioned this man who was a neuroscientist and fell into a coma, who had these vivid experiences. He was convinced mind and brain existed together. I mean, you couldn't have a brain you can have a mind without a brain, but after his experience, he totally changed his mind because he experienced the mind very different from the brain. He was almost brain dead in that moment. But he also talks about the fact that he had no language. He had lost the ability for language, and still he had these vivid experiences, but they were beyond language. So that's also helped me to make more sense of this. Like, as children, I don't know what the symbolism is, but there is a type of symbolism. So whatever is the symbolism for milk, it's probably just an appearance of the image of, like, oh, this is my mom. So maybe just when you think of your mom, and there's like almost like a photo, like a scenery from the past appearing to you, in that way your mom appears. So I guess it's like through these almost like photographs. I mean, they're not photographs, of course, but like mental photographs or mental scenes. Those are the generic images, right? Without using words. And children have that. So every time this appears to their mind and then they match what they see outside, then they know it's their mom or it's someone else. So when it's a stranger, they start crying or they hide. Whereas if it's the person the generic image matches, then they feel drawn to them, for instance. That's how I believe it works. And then and they build on that. First, they're just very basic things that they recognize, but then slowly they make more and more sense of what they perceive, and they categorize more and more objects. And eventually learn how to apply the appropriate terms.
To go back to the yogic direct perceiver, I was just curious. So when the yogic direct perceiver has a direct experience, let's say, of impermanence, what is it that they see?
What was it that you said? They have a direct experience of?
Say subtle impermanence, right?
Subtle impermanence, yes.
The direct, what is it that they see, or what is it?
They see, what they perceive.
What
Again,
is it?
yeah, again, something I have no experience of, so I'm just, out of the dark.
When we remember something non-conceptual, it's an experience that they are having of that thing.
Yes, I think it's well, just knowing the impermanence, and it's not like they cannot change between, like, oh, knowing the impermanence of this or impermanence of that. They can do that, not by way of thinking about it, but by way of just directly perceiving it. So I have a hard time, again, how can I put it into words? But it's just that direct knowledge. I guess it's similar to the conceptual mind that knows its object, but it's just a direct knowledge without the generic image, and therefore without thinking. It's like this, it's like that. It's just that clear experience.
Similarly with selflessness, right? With selflessness.
Selflessness, yeah. Selflessness, or anything. Anything. It's basically anything can be known, anything that exists. I still remember Venerable Tekchok's question. He asked, what about a non-existent? If you focus on it long enough, can you not have a yogic direct perceiver? No, it wouldn't be a yogic direct perceiver, but a direct non-conceptual mind that realizes the horns, or that perceives the horns of a rabbit. But later on, that is clear in this text also that this is not possible. So it must be something that does exist, but it could be anything. I mean, we focus on impermanence, we focus on selflessness, because that's what we need to know in order to become liberated. You don't need to know a vast to become liberated. So that's why it's not mentioned as a path. However, you would develop those minds as well. Like, I mean, definitely once you become a Buddha, you have all of your minds are like that. I mean, no, you wouldn't sit down and meditate on the vase for, I don't know, hours on end just to be able to experience a vase directly. This is important. Like when we talk about like becoming a Buddha, sometimes the texts mention, they say you don't have to know more things in order to become all-knowing. So let's read more encyclopedia. Let's, look at Wikipedia more. I want to become a Buddha. I need more knowledge. It's not like that. You need to know certain things, and that's what you focus on, like when it comes to emptiness, when it comes to selflessness, and so on, impermanence. Once you're a Buddha, the obstructions to knowing, they're just gone. So you just know.
So does the yogic direct perceiver seeing selflessness see the aggregates?
No. As a sentient being, you can't. You can't. Because there's a simple reason for that. If as a sentient being, if you have the appearance of an aggregate, of the aggregates, let's say the appearance of the mind and body, it always appears inherently. Whatever is a conventional truth that appears to your mind, it appears to exist inherently. Now, if your mind apprehends the non-inherent existence of the aggregates with a yogic direct perceiver, if the aggregates were to appear, then they would appear as inherently and non-inherently, and that's impossible. So it's one of the two. If they appear non-inherently, since you directly realize the emptiness of the aggregates, then the aggregates cannot appear.
So
only for a Buddha, because there's no longer the appearance of inherent existence when conventional truth appears. So a Buddha can do both. Can know the aggregates at the same time as knowing their non-inherent existence.
So technically, is there a difference between selflessness and emptiness, right? What is that?
It depends what school. It depends on the school. So the two lower schools, Vaibhashika and Sautrantika, don't even mention emptiness. So don't worry about the distinction. They don't even have that as part of their vocabulary. They don't use the word emptiness. They only talk about selflessness. The Chittamatra and the Madhyamika Svatantrika, they talk of both selflessness and emptiness, and they distinguish between the two. They say selflessness refers to the lack of an autonomous self, or the lack of a permanent part as independent self, and the lack of a self-sufficient, substantially existent self. That's considered to be selflessness. One is coarse, one is subtle. In the Prasangika school, those two selflessnesses, lack of a permanent part as independent self and lack of a self-sufficient, substantially existent self, that's not even considered selflessness. That's only coarse selflessness. That is coarse selflessness. Actual selflessness and emptiness are the same. Selflessness and emptiness are the same. So there's certain assertions that are unique to the Prasangika school, and it needs some getting used to. But once you do, you understand selflessness, the word self as part of selflessness, is really just talking of some kind of essence that we see in everything. We see in ourselves and we see in other things. When we see it in ourselves, we describe it as I. Right? An exaggerated, projected I. When we see it in a car, we see that the essence of the car. But that selflessness is the same as inherent existence, in that it's some kind of essence that is not dependent on anything else. Right? So selflessness, emptiness describe the same.
That was very helpful. Thank you, Geshe-la.
You're welcome. Okay. Now going back to the text. I hope this is a little clearer now. We still have some time, yeah. That the definition of intention is. Okay. If there are no further questions, I'll continue. Okay. That the definition of intention is a mental factor that moves and incites the mind with which it is concomitant toward the object. Alright, so move or incite, there's a further verb used here, but other than that, it's the same as before. Accordingly, the Compendium of Knowledge says, what is intention? It is a mental action that actually conditions the mind. Not conditions the mind. It sets up the mind. It shapes the mind. It influences the mind. What is intention? It is a mental action that actually conditions the mind. Forget what the Tibetan word here is now, but I remember.
Is it moves the mind or no?
No, it doesn't say move. Venerable Teacher, do you have the Tibetan right there? Of that particular?
I can read. You want me to read the Tibetan? Because I'm not sure which word it is.
Oh, okay.
This microphone isn't working, right?
No, it's not working. It's not working properly. There's some issue with the Okay, let me just quickly look myself, check myself. Sharablayana. Ngaba sharab shabala. Dingen thinking what I am now. Shiba dingen. Okay. Ngamba zogetish. Sumba temba shabala. Oh, I'm too already. The Jungenga, that's not what I'm. Kundunga. Ah, yeah, here it is. Kundunga. Okay. Lula Niba Dushikingo. Dushilayana. Sumba sembengo. Okay, here we go. Gomba kundule. Sem kanjana. Sem gomba ducheba yigi lede. Ngumber ducheba. Yeah, I think that's what you read. That sounded like you read that, right? Yeah. Yeah. Ngumber ducheba. Ngumber ducheba, actually. Ngumber ducheba yigi lede. Okay. Yeah, so that was so it can be used as conditioned in a particular context. Yeah, now I know why I had such a hard time with that. What does it mean to condition the mind? What does it mean to condition the mind? It just sounds odd. Like, how do you condition the mind? So it's more like it shapes the mind, it forms the mind, it sets up the mind. It's responsible for like shaping the mind, as in like, or influencing the mind. Maybe condition is okay, but to me it just sounds a little bit wrong. So like it sets up the mind in terms of being, is it virtuous or non-virtuous? It influences the mind in that sense. So therefore it is a mental action that actually shapes the mind. It has the function of making the mind engage in virtuous, non-virtuous, or neutral actions. So it does have the connotation of giving rise to something. All right, so first there's the intention. For instance, in particular when it comes to the mental consciousness, because of course the sense consciousnesses are always neutral. They're never virtuous or non-virtuous. So becoming virtuous or not, that comes from the intention, in that it moves the mind towards a virtuous object or non-virtuous object. I mean, if I meet someone, if I focus on their negative traits, for instance, which then give rise to anger, well, that's the intention that did so, right? If you think about it, your intention moves the mind towards some negative aspects. And then to do with our self-centeredness, for instance, if the negative aspects are directed at ourselves, so they talk to us in a harsh way, they insult us, for instance, then that gives rise to an exaggerated perception of the insult, which in turn gives rise to anger and actions out of anger. So therefore, what is intention? It is a mental action that actually shapes the mind, in that, or it influences the mind, the mental consciousness, in terms of becoming virtuous, non-virtuous, or neutral. Why? Because it has the function of making the mind engage in virtuous, non-virtuous, or neutral actions. Of course, it doesn't do so on its own. It needs other factors as well. But focusing in on moving the mind towards certain aspects, that is this function of what's it called, intention, and therefore that is responsible, that is considered to be mainly responsible for what follows, so virtuous, non-virtuous, or neutral actions. And these actions could be mental, verbal, or physical. So action doesn't always mean physical or verbal, but also, like, I'm just focusing in on the insult that the person just directed at me, for instance. And so instead of seeing everything else they've done, they've been really kind, they've done this, that, and the other, no, I choose to ignore that, and instead just focus on the insult, which then in turn gives rise to anger. Okay. Yes, please. Yes.
This moves the mind. Should this be taken literally? Like the mind, you could, like, for example, in the bardo, to go to your new body?
No, not physically. No, not physically. It's not a physical movement. It's kind of directing the mind. But that could also be seen as physical. But no, not direct. Like focusing the mind on something specific, moving it towards a particular object. So mentally moving it to an object, focusing more on this versus that. But the action of focusing, the problem then becomes this kind of like attention. But no, it's choosing one over the other, kind of the way I look at it. It's like choosing to focus on that or pay more attention to this versus to something else. But again, you
Okay.
have attention, so not to use another word that implies another function. Yeah. So chooses, selects. Maybe that works better. The Compendium of Ascertainment says, what function does intention have? It has the function of motivating actions of thought, body, and speech. For example, just as a magnet moves iron, this mental factor's ability is to make the mind or any of its mental factors engage the object. The only problem I have with the magnet is like the magnet could move towards the object, but it's much more the object moves towards it. Versus here, it's kind of like the mind moves toward the object. Yeah, so the magnet moves iron. But then there's no physical movement. You don't even need to wonder about something physically being moved. So, yeah, but anyway, yeah, someone wanted to say something. Yes, please.
Is it something with also when we say to get familiarized with wisdom or selflessness or familiarized with love and compassion? It works like this?
Yeah,
This.
in that case as well. Yeah,
Okay.
because that's a very virtuous action. Again, going back to turning the mind into moving the mind towards virtue. Yeah, instead of focusing on the insult of that person, I focus on their impermanence or their selflessness. In that case, my mind becomes virtuous. The mind becomes virtuous, right? It engages in virtuous actions. Exactly, yeah. All right, engage. When categorized in terms of the sense faculties, which are the basis, there are 6. So ranging from an intention that arises from contact. Here, contact is not contact. It's not contact in the sense of the mental factor of contact. Although in Tibetan it does say rekba, it does say rek, but it doesn't mean contact in the mental factor. It's just getting together. So ranging from an intention that arises from getting together with this contact. That's sort of weird, like meeting. They sometimes even say taba in Tibetan, meeting or coming together. It's again not literally like the mind and them actually meeting. So it's a physical term that is used usually in a physical context, but here it's just meaning they get in touch with one another. So in other words, you have a sense faculty such as the eye sense faculty. If the eye sense faculty reacts together with the mind, then it's an eye consciousness. It reacts with the mind, then you have an eye consciousness. And so you have that intention and concomitant with an eye consciousness. That's really what it's saying. It seems to be saying something more than that, but I don't think so. It's just a complicated way of saying it. When categorized in terms of the sense faculties, which are the basis, there are 6 types of intentions. So ranging from an intention that is associated with the visual sense faculty getting involved, all the way to an intention that arises from getting together or reacting due to the involvement of the mental sense faculty. From among the 2 types of action that is intention and action that is intended. So you have 2 types actually of intention. Action that is intention and action that is intended. Action that is intention refers to an intention that is concomitant with the mental consciousness it accompanies. So basically, here we discuss karma more specifically. Now with the sense consciousnesses, we don't talk about karma. Sense consciousnesses, they're always neutral. So in a way you could say it's neutral karma, but really karma is really discussed mainly on the basis of virtuous and non-virtuous karma. In fact, the karma that is responsible for our rebirth, which is described as throwing or propelling karma, is always virtuous or non-virtuous. So neutral karma, although it exists, but it has very weak effects only. I mean, only neutral kind of experiences, which are not, not very powerful. And mainly it's virtuous and non-virtuous ones. So therefore, the sense consciousnesses don't need to be mentioned. Here we focus on the mental consciousness. The mental consciousness, every mental consciousness serves as potentially as an intention. I mean, it can potentially, it doesn't always give rise to actions, but it can. So the intention, therefore, associated with the mental consciousness, can be described as action that is intention. I mean, there's always a mental event, there's always mental action, and the intention. And depending on the type of mind, it can then give rise to physical or verbal actions. So going back to, for instance, focusing on the insult that another person directs at us. So in that case of the insult, first there's just, okay, I'm focusing on that, the mind is focused, there's intention, of course, because they focus the mind on that the particular words the person spoke. But then it goes on, the mind is thinking, oh, this is not okay, and so forth. Anger arises, and the anger that arises, the intention that is associated or that is concomitant with that anger, then gives rise to a mind that possibly wants to retaliate, say something rude, for instance, which then gives rise to an action that is intended, saying, I don't know, you suck or whatever. So therefore we say the mental consciousness, the intention itself, it moves the mind towards, for instance, the motivation. Now I want to say something horrible towards them, right? At first you're just angry, but then the intention, the function of the mind that focuses on something, then focuses the mind on saying you suck, which turns the whole mind into the motivation to say you suck. And a moment later you have the actual word spoken, which is an action that is intended. Does that make sense? Or making a scowling face, for instance, like scowling expressions, or look at them in that way. Yes, Anastasia?
So are there also mental actions that are intended?
Are there mental actions that are intended? Actually, you'd have to say yes.
So
Yes.
that would also have and what kind of mental factor does that action have?
Well, for instance, like, let me give you the example. Let me give you the example. So I'm really pissed off. I'm really angry with that person. And so then I decide I want to kill them. I'm planning to kill them. So without actually killing them, or before I set out to kill them, and sometimes there's just the intention to kill them, and you never actually act upon it. So then there's this whole kind of scenario in your mind, how you go about killing them. That would be an intended physical action of killing them. So I think when it says the action, the physical and the body or speech that arise, that are motivated by that previous mind, there are only actions that is attended. But so it's just saying it can never be an action that is intention. But I believe that the physical, the mental planning of killing the person could also be talked about as an action that is intended. But it's also an action. But it's also an action that is intention. It is both.
Yeah.
Right? No. Sorry, I need to correct that. The intention itself is always an action that is intention, but the mind it gives rise to, like not specifically giving rise to another intention, but just giving rise to a mental event that is planning the killing. That mental event itself could be called an action that is intended. Let's put it that way.
And
is that clear?
Yeah. That was like, I'm wondering that mental action that is intended
Yes.
also has the omnipresent mental factor of intention.
That's true.
What kind of
that is an action that is intention, because that in turn gives rise possibly to the physical killing. Possibly.
Yeah.
So when we say it's an intention, when we say it's an action that is intention, it doesn't mean action has to always follow.
Yeah.
It doesn't always have to follow. But in general, I mean, it could just tense up the body, for instance. Like, you don't go out to kill them. But if you plan to kill them And then as a result of that, you tense up, for instance. That is because of the action of killing. So your heart pressure, your blood pressure goes up and so forth. Although that's not the intention, but it's how can I put it? The action of intention. So it's not like you want your blood pressure to go up, but it's still because of that movement of the mind planning the killing, without actually then giving rise to an act of killing itself, it does give rise to certain physical conditions, right? And that's again through this intention. So in other words, first you're just angry with that person. That is an action. So here the intention is an action that is intention. What is the action? It directly gives rise to the planning of killing that person. So that is the mind itself, including all the minds and mental factors. But then that mind that plans the killing, if you look at the intention that is associated with it, that would again be an action that is intention, because it gives rise to a certain physical. For instance, even I believe, although you don't want your blood pressure to go up, you as a person, when you're not angry, but it's still in that moment, that mind causes that. The mind that wants to kill this other person, it causes this tension in your body. So that is actually an intended action. Right? The blood pressure going up in your body is an intended action. Why? Because there was a mind that caused it. So this is not that your blood pressure goes up just because you ate the wrong food or whatever, you have some hereditary kind of condition. No, this is because there was a mind that brought this about. Does that make sense? So, and then if you kill that person anyway, in that moment, yes, you kill that person because of your anger, the anger giving rise to the plan to do so, and the plan to do so giving rise to the, so therefore a mental action, it's not the intention itself that is seen as the mental action, but it's the whole mental event. But then the intention that is associated with that whole mental action or that mental event, that is again an intention, an action that is intention. That's how I understand this. Does that make sense? Is that a little confusing? Okay. All right, action that is intention. Oh my God, ooh, I forgot. It was just 10 minutes earlier, a second ago. Funny. Anyway, we're done for today. So where did we get to? Page 133 in my text. So we've covered about 4 pages. 1, 2. Oh, we can easily finish tomorrow with the omnipresent mental factors, and then I'll just be jumping a little bit. Great. Thank you very much. And
dedication.
Dedicate.
Having thoroughly investigated in accord of all that I have heard day and night through the whole evening, my God of reflection on these topics of contemplation, may this discernment sever all doubts.
All right. Thank you. And
Thank
see
you
you later.
very much.